Hello everyone, Chris Buick here for UK Film Review, and I'm here today to talk to you all about the science fiction indie feature film The Reality Experiment, which was written and directed by filmmaker Jake Trevaskis. So, like a lot of science fiction films, it asks some pretty big questions. The core question in this film really boils down to what is reality? So is reality something that we can see or hear or touch? Is what we perceive as reality simply some kind of projection that the brain puts in front of us to kind of make sense of the world as it is, with instead of just particles flying around amongst us? And also, what if what we perceive as reality is something we imagine together as a collective? These are some pretty deep questions, but they are, like I say, the core concepts behind this film, The Reality Experiment. So, in this film, a group of rather varied test subjects are led by a neuroscience student by the name of Jeremy, played by Seaton K. Smith. His theory is that reality is a consciousness that we share between us all, and there is a way collectively to disconnect from it. So the first stage requires Jeremy to create a collection of very in-depth profiles about each of the subjects, and this is where the film really just hits the ground running. It's a very fun and inspired way to pass the first half hour almost in a breeze. We get the chance to really get to know each and every single member of this cast, and this cast is a stellar cast, it must be said. Well rounded, each one very talented, and each character is as unique and as interesting as the next. So, for example, we have in our test group, we have Paul, who is the unassuming but caring family man. We have Catherine, who is the glamorous grad student with big ideas and big goals in life. We have Dean, who is the young, naive alcoholic. We've got Nick, who is the cocky know-it-all, who thinks he's God's gift. Miles, who is the low-key rational thinker of the group. Ruth, the horror film aficionado. And finally, we have Kelly, who is a bit of a mystery. She doesn't even herself seem to know what she's about, and that's something we get to discover as the film goes on. But like I say, each character has their own traits. We find out what makes them tick, makes it a very varied group that is really interesting to go along on this journey with. So that opening half hour really leads nicely into part two of Jeremy's experiment, which is his methodology is to target a very specific part of the brain with a slight shock that will disconnect them from this collective consciousness that he believes is what makes reality. But the group must administer this shock to themselves simultaneously, so they all disconnect together, essentially. There are some protests, some backs and forths, some do's and don'ts, pros and cons, as you can imagine. However, they've all been promised $200 for just a few hours of their time. So eventually the group thinks, okay, let's go. There's a bright flash, and the changes are initially subtle. Kelly, for example's phone has upgraded. She has the newest model. Some of the group have different clothes. They can't decide what they were before, but they all agree there has been some change there. So everyone is initially very happy at the success of the experiment. However, more substantial, bigger, life-changing things seem to be noticed, and things start to spiral out of control a bit. They then think, okay, let's try and make things right. But of course, as with most of these things in science fiction films, the more you play God and mess with the fabric of reality, I guess, the more serious and fatal these changes and consequences become. And to go any further into what happens is obviously going to be into real spoiler territory, but suffice it to say, from that moment on, it is absolutely seriously gripping stuff. It is fairly enjoyable, but so fraught with tension at the same time. Trevaskis is very good at balancing how much you need to know about the science versus how much you don't need to know, so it doesn't get in the way of the fun and the experience of it all. For every jump they do to a new reality, you just when you think you can relax, you are immediately back into edge of your seat position where you're dreading whatever craziness Trevaskis and his team have thought of for this new event. Some of them are utterly bizarre, some of them are utterly terrifying, but each one is a brilliant idea that the gift, like I say again, the very gifted cast get to play out, and we get to enjoy. It's non-stop tension. Even when the film changes tact, it passes the baton, I guess, from Jeremy on to Kelly. The film just effortlessly marches on in its new direction and drags us along with it, although more than happy to be dragged at this point. But what is definitely the most impressive thing is how much Trevaskis and his team achieve in this film with very little, and by that I mean like in a budgetary sense. They've only got a handful of locations which are very sparse, not much going on there. There's a few chairs, there's some balls taped onto sticks with other things taped to them, but the complete creativity and resourcefulness on display with just that, in both technically and in how it works for the story, it just means the reality experiment is so accomplished in everything it achieves. It is fully realized, fully formed film, and it is a blast from first minute to the last. It is in every reality a triumph.